I still remember the exact moment she said it, those words, sharp as daggers, cutting through the tension in the room. "You're an unqualified idiot," my manager spat, her voice dripping with disdain. I could feel my face flush, a mixture of embarrassment and anger rising in me. My hands clenched into fists under the table, but I stayed silent. No one had ever spoken to me like that before, and honestly, I was stunned. Here I was, working my hardest, putting in the hours, dealing with the pressure day after day, and this was how she saw me. The meeting had started like any other, standard performance review. But then she started listing all the things I was supposedly doing wrong. Every mistake magnified, every achievement dismissed. I had heard whispers around the office that she was tough, but this felt personal. Her words echoed in my mind, long after I left the room. Unqualified idiot. At first, I questioned myself. Was I really not good enough? Was I failing? But as the days passed, something shifted inside me. Anger turned into resolve. I wasn't going to let one person define my worth. I didn't care how high her position was, or how many people she had on her side. I was going to show her that she had made a terrible mistake. This wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't even about getting back at her for the insults. It was about proving something to myself, that I could rise above her and do it without stooping to her level, that no matter what someone said, it didn't matter as long as I believed in my own abilities. And soon enough, I was going to make sure she regretted the day she ever underestimated me. This moment would set the stage for everything to come. The following days after the incident with my manager felt like a fog. At first, I didn't know where to begin. I had been knocked down, and though I didn't want to admit it, I was shaken. The sting of her words lingered. But what bothered me the most was not the insult itself. It was the fact that I allowed it to get under my skin. I had always prided myself on being resilient, on being the one who could handle anything thrown my way. Yet for some reason, her words had broken through that wall I'd carefully built. I knew I couldn't stay like this, feeling small and defeated. I needed a plan, and I needed support. That's when I turned to my colleague, Zoe. She'd been working in the company for longer than I had, and she had always been an advocate for doing things the right way, even if it meant challenging authority. Over the past few months, we'd become good friends, and her advice had helped me navigate some tough situations in the past. If anyone could give me a fresh perspective on how to deal with my manager, it was Zoe. "Zoe," I started one afternoon during our lunch break. "I need your help. Something happened in my performance review that's been bugging me. My manager called me an unqualified idiot, and, well, I don't know how to handle it." Her expression softened immediately. She set down her sandwich and leaned in, giving me her full attention. "What exactly happened?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. I recounted the details of the meeting, explaining how my manager seemed to have singled me out for every small mistake, how she had belittled me in front of the team, and how her words stung more than I ever anticipated. Zoe nodded as I spoke, her brow furrowed in concern. When I finished, she sat back in her chair, arms crossed, and let out a slow breath. "That's not okay," she said, her voice low but determined. "You've been working your ass off. I've seen it. You're not the problem. She is. But it sounds like she's got something personal against you. It's like she's trying to tear you down." I felt a little better hearing that. Zoe had, always been one to speak her mind, especially when it came to injustice. So her support meant the world to me. "What should I do?" I asked, feeling both vulnerable and determined. She gave me a thoughtful look, then a small smile. "You've got two choices. Either you let her keep walking all over you, or you stand up for yourself. And let me tell you, Standing up for yourself isn't about getting in her face or throwing a tantrum. It's about showing her that you are worth more than her petty insults. It's about proving to everyone in that office that you belong here. Because you do. Her words struck a chord deep within me. Zoe was right. I had been letting my manager's comments define me, and I had let them take root in my mind. But that wasn't who I was. I wasn't someone who would let a toxic environment drag me down. I had worked too hard for that. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, playing through every possible scenario. I wasn't just going to prove my worth to her. I was going to prove it to myself. And the first step in that was understanding why she'd targeted me in the first place. At work the next morning, I took a different approach. I had always kept to myself in the office, focused on my work, and tried not to attract too much attention. But now, I realized that silence wasn't helping me anymore. I needed to be proactive, not reactive. I started by building stronger relationships with my coworkers, those who I knew respected my work ethic, but also those who might have had their own doubts about me. In the weeks that followed, I worked hard to rebuild my confidence and gain the trust of those around me. I made it a point to assist others in their projects, offer advice when needed, and make sure my work was impeccable. Slowly, I saw the tides shifting. People began noticing my dedication, my willingness to go above and beyond. One afternoon, I was in the break room when I overheard a conversation between a few of my colleagues. They were discussing the latest project deadlines and the pressure from upper management. It was the kind of conversation I would have tuned out before, but this time, I listened closely. "Did you hear about the performance review fiasco with manager's name and my name?" one of them asked. Another colleague shook their head. "Yeah, but honestly, I don't get it. My name has been putting in all this work, and for her to call them an idiot, just wrong. I'm kind of shocked." That struck me. The words, though not directed at me, felt like a validation I hadn't expected. My colleagues saw me. They saw my effort, and they saw the unfair treatment from my manager. That was the first real crack in the walls that had been built around me. I wasn't alone in this. With Zoe's support and the growing sense of respect from my coworkers, I started to feel like I could take on the challenge. It wasn't just about getting even with my manager anymore. It was about showing everyone, including myself, that I had value. The conflict had shifted from being about the insult she hurled at me to something far more powerful. The realization that I was capable of so much more than I had ever believed. As the days passed, my resolve strengthened. I wasn't just surviving in that office anymore. I was building a network, a support system, and a path to show everyone that I was more than just the words that had been thrown at me. And all the while, I kept in mind that this wasn't about revenge. It was about transformation. The weeks following my conversation with Zoe were a whirlwind of emotions. On the surface, I was going through the motions, attending meetings, completing projects, interacting with colleagues, but inside, I was on a mission. I couldn't just sit back and let my manager continue to demean me without consequences. Every action I took, every decision I made, was part of a bigger plan to make her regret what she'd said, but also to prove to myself that I wasn't going to be defined by her cruelty. At first, it felt like an uphill battle. My manager, let's call her Karen, was notorious for belittling people under her command. I wasn't the first employee she had insulted, and I definitely wouldn't be the last if I let her get away with it. But what I came to realize as I settled into my new approach was that Karen's power wasn't in her position. It was in her ability to manipulate and intimidate those around her. I wasn't going to fall for that. One of the first obstacles I faced was my own internal doubt. Every time I walked into that office, I had to remind myself that I was capable of succeeding on my own terms. There were moments when Karen's icy stares made me question if I had it in me to go toe-to-toe with someone who had the power to make or break my career, but I couldn't let that stop me. I was determined to show everyone, including myself, that I was more than capable. I began taking more risks at work, suggesting new ideas during meetings, stepping up to lead small projects, and volunteering for tasks that no one else wanted. But every time I felt a flicker of confidence, Karen found a way to try and shoot me down. If I presented an idea, she'd dismiss it without a second thought, often adding a snide remark about how I was wasting everyone's time. If I volunteered for a project, she'd assign me menial tasks that seemed beneath my abilities. At first I was frustrated, but then something clicked. I realized that she wasn't trying to stop me from succeeding. She was trying to make me doubt myself. The more I realized that, the more I knew how I had to approach the situation. By the third week after the incident, I started turning the tables. I stopped taking her dismissals personally. Every time she shot down my idea, I would respond with calm persistence, tweaking the concept and presenting it again later, showing that I wasn't deterred. I kept records of the projects I was assigned, documenting my progress and the additional responsibilities I was taking on, even when they weren't acknowledged by her. I started building a case, not just for my own peace of mind, but for when the time came to challenge her. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed allies. Zoe had been my support, but I wasn't blind to the fact that I needed more people in my corner if I was going to take on Karen. So, I began networking in a way I hadn't before. I reached out to colleagues who had worked under Karen longer than I had. I started asking questions, listening to their experiences. Some of them were quick to open up, sharing horror stories of Karen's favoritism, her petty gossip, and how she would throw people under the bus to save herself. It was clear that I wasn't alone in my struggle, and the more I spoke to people, the more I realized that Karen's grip on the office wasn't as solid as she thought. One of the most eye-opening conversations I had was with Andrew, a senior colleague who had been with the company for over a decade. He had always been an enigma to me, quiet, professional, and seemingly unaffected by the drama in the office. But when I approached him one afternoon after a meeting, he surprised me. "You're not the first one she's done that to," Andrew said, his voice low but serious. "I've seen her tear down some of the best people here. People who were qualified, who had the skills. It's all about control with her." He paused, looking around to make sure no one else was listening. "But don't think for a second that you have to take it. You've got more power than you think." His words hit me like a wave. He was right. Karen had been trying to control me by making me feel small. But the truth was, I had the power to take control of the situation. With the support of people like Zoe and Andrew, I began to feel more emboldened. But Karen wasn't going to make it easy. She started noticing the change in me, and she didn't like it. One afternoon, she called me into her office. As I walked in, I could feel the tension in the air. She wasn't smiling like she usually did when she had a point to make. Instead, her eyes narrowed and her posture stiffened. "I've noticed you've been more assertive lately," she said, her voice cool. "I'm not sure I appreciate that." I kept my expression neutral. "I'm just trying to contribute more to the team, Karen," I replied, my tone calm but firm. "Is that a problem?" For a moment, there was silence. Karen studied me, as if trying to figure out if I was trying to challenge her. Finally, she spoke, her voice clipped. "I don't think you're ready for the kind of responsibilities you're pushing for. You're still making mistakes, and your performance is far from where it should be." I could feel my blood start to boil, but I held my ground. "I'll keep working on improving, Karen, but I think I've demonstrated enough ability to take on more responsibility." There was another long pause. Then Karen simply nodded. "We'll see." The conversation left me unsettled, but I refused to let it derail my progress. If anything, it only solidified my resolve. I knew I had to keep pushing forward, because if I didn't, I was letting her win. Over the next few weeks, I pushed harder. I stayed later at work, took on more projects, and started showing results. My relationship with the other team members was improving, and I could see that people were starting to notice. But Karen wasn't backing down either. She ramped up her efforts to undermine me, questioning my decisions in front of others. Always, finding fault with the smallest things I did. The stakes were getting higher. It was becoming clear that the conflict between Karen and me wasn't just about a personal insult. It was about power. She had spent years building her position by tearing others down, and now I was challenging that. The more I pushed, the more she tried to push me back. But this time, I wasn't backing down. I had a plan, and I was going to see it through to the end. The day of the big meeting had finally arrived. It was the culmination of months of silent preparation, subtle resistance, and strategic maneuvering. And as I walked into the conference room, I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This wasn't just any meeting. It was the one where everything would come to a head. I was no longer just the unqualified idiot in Karen's eyes. I was someone who had earned their place at the table, someone who could no longer be ignored or undermined. The room was filled with the usual faces, senior management, department heads, and a handful of colleagues. I took my seat at the far end of the table, next to Zoe, who gave me a supportive nod. I'd kept her in the loop about everything that had been happening, and now she was ready to back me up if things took a turn. Karen walked in, her sharp heels clicking on the floor, her expression cool and unreadable. She took her place at the head of the table, her usual air of authority radiating off her. But today, I could see it in her eyes. She was tense. She knew this was the moment where I would either crumble or stand my ground. And she was betting on the former. The meeting started as usual, with updates on ongoing projects and department goals. But I wasn't here to discuss just that. I had a point to make, and I wasn't going to wait for the right moment to slip past me. As soon as the discussion shifted to a project I'd been spearheading for the past few weeks, I took a deep breath and dove in. I'd like to provide an update on the X project, I began, my voice steady but firm. We've made significant progress, and I believe we're on track to meet our target deadlines. There are a few challenges, but nothing that's insurmountable. I glanced at Karen as I spoke, watching her reaction closely. Her eyes narrowed as I presented the data, the metrics, and the strategies I had implemented. I could see her trying to find fault, trying to poke holes in my presentation. But this time, there was nothing she could use against me. I had double-checked every detail, prepared for every possible criticism. When I finished, there was a brief silence. I could feel Karen's disapproval hanging in the air like a thick cloud. But instead of the usual dismissal, there was an unusual pause. The room had gone quiet, everyone waiting for her response. Karen finally spoke, her tone colder than usual. This is acceptable, but you still have a lot to prove. I don't think you're ready for the level of responsibility you're pushing for. I didn't flinch. I had prepared for this moment, and I wasn't going to let her belittle me again. With all due respect, Karen, I said, leaning forward just slightly, I think I've proven myself more than capable. The results are here, in front of everyone. I've been contributing, taking on more responsibility, and, most importantly, showing growth. For the first time in this entire ordeal, Karen seemed taken aback. Her eyes flickered, the facade of her unshakable authority momentarily cracking. The room shifted, sensing the change. Some of my colleagues, who had been quiet observers until now, started shifting in their seats, their attention now fully on the exchange. "You've got a lot of nerve," she said, her voice tight. "Do you really think you can challenge me in front of everyone?" I met her gaze without hesitation, my heart pounding, but my resolve unwavering. "I'm not challenging you, Karen. I'm simply stating facts. The team and I have worked hard, and I believe I've earned my position. Here, I deserve more than just being dismissed or underestimated. I'm ready for more responsibility. And if you can't see that, then maybe it's not me who's unqualified. There was a tense silence in the room. I could feel the weight of my words hanging in the air, the truth sinking in. Karen's control, her ability to dominate with sharp words and subtle manipulations, had been broken. I had finally spoken up, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been pushed aside by her. Karen's face turned a deep shade of red, and for a moment, it looked like she might explode. But instead, she simply straightened in her chair, her usual composure returning. "We'll see," she muttered, her voice low, barely above a whisper. The meeting dragged on for another hour, but I was no longer listening. I had made my point, and I could see the shift in the room. The colleagues who had once whispered behind closed doors now seemed more confident, their eyes no longer afraid of Karen's judgment. As the meeting concluded and everyone started to leave, Zoe leaned over and whispered, "That was incredible. You did it. She can't ignore you anymore." I nodded, my heart still racing but with a deep sense of satisfaction. I had done it. Not only had I stood up to Karen, but I had done so in a way that made it clear I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't just an unqualified idiot. I was someone who belonged here, who had earned their place through hard work, determination, and courage. The tide had finally turned, and Karen, she was the one who would have to reckon with the consequences of underestimating me. In the days that followed, the meeting, things began to change. The atmosphere in the office felt different, lighter even. I had expected some pushback from Karen, but the response was almost anticlimactic. She kept to her usual routine, but there was something in the way she looked at me now that spoke volumes. It was as though she realized the game had changed, and she no longer had the upper hand. The power dynamics between us had shifted irrevocably. I noticed it first in the way my colleagues interacted with me. No longer did I feel like an outsider or the subject of hushed conversations. People started acknowledging my contributions more openly. They asked for my input during meetings and even began to seek my advice on projects. Zoe, who had been my pillar of support through this whole ordeal, gave me a knowing smile whenever she caught my eye. I could tell she was proud of me, but also relieved that the tension had finally broken. It wasn't just my coworkers who noticed the change. Karen did too. But she was no longer the looming figure of authority she once was. Her attempts to undermine me seemed half-hearted at best. Whenever she would make a passing remark or try to subtly challenge my work, I stood my ground with confidence, offering evidence to back up my decisions. And every time, she backed off, her sharp words dulled by my quiet but unshakable determination. There was one final test, one that I hadn't anticipated. A few weeks after the showdown in the meeting, Karen asked me to take the lead on an important project. I couldn't believe my ears when she called me into her office to deliver the request. It was a significant project, one that could elevate my position within the company. But I wasn't naive. I knew it wasn't an act of kindness or newfound respect. It was her way of testing me, trying to see if I could truly handle the responsibility. As I sat across from her desk, I carefully considered my response. It would be easy to assume she was offering this as a form of redemption, a way for her to save face. But I knew better than to let her manipulate the situation. "I'll accept the project, Karen," I said calmly. "But I want full autonomy on how it's managed. I'll take full responsibility for the results, and I expect the freedom to make decisions without interference." There was a brief moment where she hesitated. I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wasn't used to anyone challenging her authority so openly, especially not me. But after a long silence, she nodded. "Fine," she said flatly, "but you better not screw it up." I smiled inwardly, knowing that this was exactly what I had worked for. I had earned her grudging respect, even if she wasn't willing to admit it out loud. I knew I was ready. I had proven myself time and time again, and now I was going to show everyone, including her, that I could handle whatever came my way. As the project progressed, I took charge with a level of professionalism and competence that I hadn't known I was capable of before. I led the team with confidence, made tough decisions, and delivered results that exceeded expectations. It was my opportunity to not only demonstrate my abilities, but also to prove to myself that I was capable of succeeding on my own terms, regardless of the toxic environment I had once feared. By the time the project was completed, Karen had little choice but to acknowledge the success. She offered a lukewarm compliment, but I didn't need her praise anymore. I knew what I had accomplished. The satisfaction wasn't in her approval. It was in my own growth, in the realization that I had faced my greatest challenge and come out on top. My relationship with Karen remained strained, but I no longer felt the weight of her judgment. I had learned to stand up for myself, to trust my own abilities, and to never let someone's words define my worth. The office dynamic had changed. People saw me differently now, not as the person who had been knocked down, but as someone who had stood tall and fought for their place. And in the end, the greatest reward wasn't the project's success, or Karen's reluctant acknowledgement. It was the realization that I had transformed from the person she had once belittled into someone who could command respect. Without needing to prove anything to anyone except myself, the shift was complete. My journey from being an unqualified idiot to becoming a leader in my own right wasn't just about proving Karen wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was more than capable. And as I walked into the office, each morning, I did so with a newfound sense of pride, knowing that I had earned my place, and nothing, not even Karen, could take that away from me. Looking back, I realize how far I've come. The person who walked into that office months ago, afraid of her own reflection after Karen's insult, wouldn't even recognize who I am now. The journey wasn't just about getting revenge or proving someone wrong. It was about something deeper. It was about rediscovering my own worth, rebuilding my confidence, and realizing that no one, not even a manager with power, could define my value. When Karen called me an unqualified idiot, she thought she had crushed me. But in reality, she had ignited a fire inside me that refused to be extinguished. The words she used to tear me down became the fuel I needed to rise higher than I had ever imagined. As I walked into the office every day, I no longer feared her or anyone else. I knew I had earned my place, and I had earned it by standing tall in the face of adversity. There was no longer a fear of failure or rejection. Instead, there was a quiet confidence in knowing that, no matter what happened, I could handle it, and I. The end, the greatest victory, wasn't in how Karen was forced to respect me. It was in how I came to respect myself. And as I stood in the office on the final day of the project, watching the team celebrate our success, I couldn't help but smile. The battle was over, and I had won. The future was mine, and nothing, not even Karen's insults, could take that away.